Here we have the Nazgul on the fell beast, first kind of view. Luckily, Legolas had already fitted an arrow to his bow. Might have taken too long for him to do that before the creature could swoop down on them otherwise. But what was it that I noticed? This right here. A dark shape like a cloud and yet not a cloud, for it moved far more swiftly. Did you catch it? Okay, in The Ring Goes South, we get this from Gandalf and Aragorn. Hello everybody, welcome to Out in Tulava, where we are walking our way through Tolkien's Legendarium. Today we're starting our journey down the Anduin in Chapter 9 of Book 2, The Great River. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Some of my favorite book versions at different price points are linked in the description, and memberships are open if you'd like to support the channel that way. All right, let's dive in. We ended the last video with the company sailing down the river away from Lorien. They watched as Lorien swept backwards like it was flowing back in time to where it truly belonged. They find themselves moving south along the river Anduin. They started again before the day was broad. Not that most of the company were eager to hurry southwards. They were content that the decision, which they must make at latest when they came to the Rauras and the Tindrek Isle, still lay some days ahead. And they let the river bear them on at its own pace, having no desire to hasten towards the perils that lay beyond, whichever course they took in the end. Aragorn let them drift with the stream as they wished, husbanding their strength against weariness to come. But he insisted that at least they should start early each day and journey on far into the evening, for he felt in his heart that time was pressing, and he feared that the Dark Lord had not been idle while they lingered in Lorien. Now, I don't know about you, but I really empathize with the company here. I mean, I haven't been sailing down a river towards danger that will, most likely kill me, but I've been ready to do something I didn't want to do and, delaying or even just, about to do a workout that I know is going to hurt and finding something else to do before I put myself through that. I bet it's a pretty common thing for most people. But despite giving them an opportunity to delay and procrastinate a bit, Aragorn makes sure they're still moving. He doesn't make them work hard, but they're not going to just do nothing. He lets them preserve their strength through the toils and hardships that are coming up. I do wonder where his feelings of time pressing came from, though. Is it like the premonition he had about Gandalf entering Moria, but maybe less specific? Was Eru specifically pushing it on his heart? I don't have the answer to that. Just another question Tolkien gives us that we kind of have to be okay with not knowing the answer. And true to Tolkien, we get a couple of paragraphs about the land around them as they travel. And he adds a little bit into it, kind of to tie future stories back into this moment and give you a fuller picture of the world. On the eastern bank to their left, they saw long, formless slopes stretching up and away towards the sky. Brown and withered they looked, as if fire had passed over them, leaving no living blade of green, an unfriendly waste without even a broken tree or a bold stone to relieve the emptiness. They had come to the brown lands that lay, vast and desolate, between southern Mirkwood and the hills of the Aemon Muil. What pestilence or war or evil deed of the enemy had so blasted all that region, even Aragorn could not tell. We'll hear mention of the Brownlands again in Book 3, but not by name. These are the lands south of Mirkwood and north of the Aemon Muil, and that is where the Entwives kept their gardens. But when Treebeard went to look for them, he found a wasteland and no Entwives. Sad story, but we'll dive further into that when, we get to that chapter. In a letter to Milton Waldman, Tolkien says, all through the book, hints of the watchfulness of spies have multiplied. And we see that with the first action and dialogue in the chapter. There was no sign of living, moving things, save birds. Of these there were many, small fowl whistling and piping in the reeds, but they were seldom seen. Once or twice the travelers heard the rush and whine of swan wings, and looking up they saw a great phalanx streaming along the sky. Swans, said Sam, and mighty big ones too. Yes, said Aragorn, and they are black swans. So we don't have confirmation that the black swans are spies of Sauron. But Aragorn doesn't seem happy about it. Maybe it's just the way I kind of hear it in my head when I read it. But to me, he seems like he's unhappy about it. Of course, there's not much they can do about it other than keep going and hope their, fancy new cloaks will help them out a little bit. But even if the cloaks did help them, Frodo has kind of a bright observation about the land that they're passing through. How wide and empty and mournful all this country looks, said Frodo. I always imagined that as one journeyed south, it got warmer and merrier until the winter was left behind forever. But we have not journeyed far south yet, answered Aragorn. It is still winter and we are far from the sea. Here the world is cold until the sudden spring, and we may yet have snow again. Far away, down in the Bay of Belfalas, to which Anduin runs, it is warm and merry, maybe, or would be but for the enemy. But here we are not above 60 leagues, I guess, south of the South Farthing away in your shire, hundreds of long miles yonder. I think Frodo's comment here is something that is really easy to pass by and turn our nose at once we kind of hear Aragorn's response. They're 60 leagues south of the Shire, if, quite a bit further to the east. Now, Google tells me that 60 leagues is 207 miles. For reference, if you started in the middle of downtown Detroit, traveled down Interstate 75 to Dayton, Ohio, you would travel almost exactly the same distance. And as someone who has been in both places in all seasons, I can tell you it's not very different at all. Like, it's basically the same in terms of weather. And if we think about it that way, then yeah, Frodo's comments sound really ignorant. But what we often forget as we're reading through this book with our modern mindset is, yeah, Frodo's is ignorant of his situation. He's never been far outside the Shire, if at all, until now. And if the Shire hardly gets any snow, and we've heard stories of how warm it is in the lands far to the south, and you've been traveling south for over a month, I completely understand his mild confusion here. He just doesn't know. The fast way for them to travel overland is a horse. They don't, that's the fastest way, and they just don't have that same frame of reference that we do. And since the travel takes a lot longer than it does for us, the company has plenty of time to think. The heart of Legolas was running under the stars of a summer night in the northern glade amid the beechwoods. Gimli was fingering gold in his mine and wondering if it were fit to be wrought into the housing of the lady's gift. Merry and Pippin in the middle boat were ill at ease, for Boromir sat muttering to himself, sometimes biting his nails as if some restlessness or doubt consumed him, sometimes seizing a paddle and driving the boat close behind Aragorn's. Then Pippin, who sat in the bow looking back, caught a queer gleam in his eye as he peered forward, gazing at Frodo. Sam had long ago made up his mind that the boats were maybe not as dangerous as he had been brought up to believe. They were far more uncomfortable than ever he had imagined. Now, I really love here how each description is just so perfectly lined up with each character. I mean, obviously, but still. Legolas is amid the beechwoods that he probably grew up in. He's just sitting there, purposefully not seeing the destruction around him. Gimli is still obsessed with Galadriel and gold, though I would be curious to know if he's wondering if any gold would be good enough for Galadriel's gift, or if it's kind of like a specific gold. And what about specific gold would he be looking for to make, perfect housing for Galadriel's gift? I mean, that's really far afield from what Tolkien's telling us and, wants us to focus on, I'm sure, but I still wonder about it. Merry and Pippin are just simply ill at ease. We get one reason to immediately fall in, but I also wonder if it's because they don't really have much to do. Sure, one of them might have a paddle, but it won't make much of a difference if Boromir decides he wants to do something, anything with the boat. So maybe it's like how I feel when someone else is kind of driving a car, just kind of generally ill at ease. And we have Boromir's continued descent into temptation, I'll say. He drives the boat close to the boat Frodo's in, staring at him. And anyone who sits there muttering to himself and biting his fingernails definitely has something going on inside. It's sad, but it's decidedly creepy picture. He's 6'6" or so. He's a thick, strong man, and hobbits would not really want to cross him at all. So it kind of gets a little scary if you put yourself in a hobbit's point of view. Sam is just, uncomfortable and useless. He doesn't even get a good book or, his Wii to help him pass the time. But in his little haze of discomfort and drowsiness, he sees something weird, but when he rubs his eyes, it's gone. As night gets close and the company put up their camp, Sam and Frodo have a little conversation about what Sam saw. "I had a funny dream an hour or two before we stopped, Mr. Frodo," he said. "Or maybe it wasn't a dream. Funny it was, anyway." "Well, what was it?" said Frodo, knowing that Sam would not settle down until he had told his tale, whatever it was. "I haven't seen or thought of anything to make me smile since we left Lothlorien. It wasn't funny that way, Mr. Frodo. It was queer, all wrong if it wasn't a dream. And you had best hear it. It was like this. I saw a log with eyes." "The log's all right," said Frodo. "There are many in the river, but leave out the eyes." They speak on the subject for an entire page, which I'm sure the estate wouldn't be thrilled about if I read. But Sam finally realizes Gollum has been trailing the company. Frodo corroborates Sam's story with his own experience of, yes, he saw him in Moria and what the elves told them the first night that they spent in Lorien. It's Gollum, the villain from Bilbo's old story, but how did he get there? So we learn some from Gandalf in Chapter 2, but everything is kind of so piecemeal. So let's take a quick look at the Tale of Years in Appendix B and see what we see. Gollum hides in the Misty Mountains first in 2470 in the Third Age. In 2944, Gollum leaves the Misty Mountains in search of Bilbo to get his precious ring back. 7 years later, he starts working his way towards Mordor. The same year Aragorn and Arwen are betrothed to each other in Lorien, 2980, Gollum meets Shelob and reaches Mordor. In 3001, Gandalf asks Aragorn to help search for Gollum. Search stalls and starts up again in 3009. Somewhere between, when he reached Mordor and, this time, he was captured by Sauron. he's not released until 3017. Aragorn captures Gollum as Gollum leaves Mordor. Then in 3018 in June, Gollum escapes the watch of the Elves of Mirkwood. By August the same year, he just disappears. He doesn't show up again until the company enter Moria through the West Gate, where he picks up their trail. And he's been following them ever since. And as Frodo has watched that night, minutes or hours passed slowly and nothing happened. Frodo was just yielding to the temptation to lie down again when a dark shape, hardly visible, floated close to one of the moored boats. A long, whitish hand could be dimly seen as it shot out and grabbed the gunwale. Two pale, lamp-like eyes shone coldly as they peered inside. And then they lifted and gazed up at Frodo on the Aet. They were not more than a yard or two away, and Frodo heard the soft hiss of intaken breath. He stood up, drawing his sting from its sheath, and faced the eyes. Immediately, the lights were shut off. There was another hiss and a splash, and the dark log shape shot away downstream into the night. Aragorn, stirred in his sleep, turned over and sat up. "What is it?" he whispered, springing up and coming to Frodo. "I felt something in my sleep. Why have you drawn your sword?" "Gollum," answered Frodo, or at least, so I guess. In Frodo's surprise and haste to defend himself, he scares Gollum away, which, makes sense. Creatures like Gollum rely on surprise when they're attacking someone, but unarmed and faced with an alert foe, not to mention foe with a sword, it's not the time to make that play. What is super interesting to me is how lightly Aragorn was sleeping. I doubt Frodo made that much noise when he stood up, since hobbits move quietly almost as a rule. And the sword being drawn from a mostly leather sheath doesn't really make that much noise. And since it's really just a dagger, there isn't that much mass to get ringing, but I'm getting a bit kind of into the weeds here on that. Aragorn is up in an instant and speaks to how much stress I think that he's under. It can be tough to fully rest when under that stress of danger and figuring out what to do for such an important mission. We can remember he mentioned their first night in Lorien was going to be the first time he could truly rest since they left Rivendell. But now he doesn't even have Gandalf to truly lead the party like he did then. The stress must really be stressing on him, but he also already knew about Gollum. So I guess we could say he was sleeping with one ear open. And since Gollum is out there and they can't catch him, Aragorn decides to have the company paddle for long stretches to try and lose the creature. He would rather not be murdered in his sleep or have orcs tipped off to where they are, as there's really only 8 of them. As the 7th day of their trip arrives, February 22nd, Aragorn needs the skill of Legolas's elf eyes. Later, as the sun was setting and the company was stirring and getting ready to start again, he descried a dark spot against the fading light, a great bird high and far off, now wheeling, now flying on slowly southwards. "What is that, Legolas?" he asked, pointing to the northern sky. "Is it, as I think, an eagle?" "Yes," said Legolas, "it is an eagle, a hunting eagle. I wonder what that forebodes. It is far from the mountains. We will not start again until it is fully dark," said Aragorn. I've heard some people say that this is Gwaihir flying Gandalf somewhere, which would probably be to Fangorn Forest. I don't really think so. Gandalf arrived in Lorien on the 17th, really just a day after the rest of the company left. Aragorn doesn't meet Gandalf in Fangorn, spoiler, until March 1st. I don't think Gandalf spent over a week just hanging out in Fangorn by himself. Now, I do think it was a great eagle, maybe Gwaihir, maybe one of his vassals, but I think they're searching for the company for Gandalf, so he would, he could go and maybe join him. But if that's the case, why would Aragorn want to start at night? Well, the eagles probably, most likely, aren't particularly dangerous to the company, so why? I think it's because the eagles, they could spot them. That means others may be able to as well. Maybe he thinks Galadriel requested the eagles' assistance to keep the coast clear for them, but if they think that there could be people or creatures searching for them during the daytime, then it would be better to travel at night, obviously. And I think Aragorn knows more about the cloaks of Lorien than the other members do too. He knows that they'll essentially disappear at night, just kind of fade into the darkness while they're wearing them. As they travel at night, Aragorn recognizes there are kind of extra dangers as well. "Come," said Aragorn, "we will venture one more journey by night. We are coming to reaches of the river that I do not know well, for I have never journeyed by water in these parts before, not between here and the rapids of Asar and Gebir. But if I am right in my reckoning, those are still many miles ahead. Still, there are dangerous places even before we come there. Rocks and stony eyots in the stream. We must keep a sharp watch and not try to paddle swiftly." Luckily, they had Sam to keep watch. They come to the beginning of rapids in their boats. And I don't know about you all, but whitewater rafting is super fun. I got to go in Colorado a couple times. It's amazing. But I will say this, I do not want to go in just a wooden canoe. And I definitely don't want to do it at night with no life jacket. And it's really tough to paddle with the river if you're going. Paddling against the river is worse. Way, way worse. A lot of effort, it sucks. And as the company is fighting their way to the side of the river to land, all together, paddle, shouted Boromir, paddle, or we shall be driven on the shoals. Even as he spoke, Frodo felt the keel beneath him grate upon stone. At that moment, there was a twang of bowstrings. Several arrows whistled over them, and some fell among them. One smote Frodo between the shoulders, and he lurched forward with a cry, letting go his paddle. But the arrow fell back, foiled by his hidden coat of mail. Another passed through Aragorn's hood, and a third stood fast in the gunwale of the second boat, close by Merry's hand. Sam thought he could glimpse black figures running to and fro upon the long, shingle banks that lay under the eastern shore. They seemed very near. So the orcs here waited until it seemed the company was completely occupied before attacking, which, pretty smart. But the orcs keep missing. I have a hard time thinking they would just give orcs with zero training bows and tell them to go shoot some people in the moving boat. As Tolkien says, many whined overhead or struck the water nearby, but there were no more hits. It was dark, but not too dark for the night eyes of orcs, and in the star glimmer they must have offered their cunning foes some mark, unless it was that the grey cloaks of Lorien and the grey timber of the elf-wrought boats defeated the malice of the archers of Mordor. Man, I love that so much. I feel it's so rare that he comes out and just kind of states something like that. Kind of a magic-y thing and how it happens. And he does it here again. He says the company must have offered a mark for the orcs, unless the cloaks and the grey boats defeated them. He states it almost as an epiphany that came to him. You can almost hear him throw a finger in the air. Unless, and as a side note though, that's one of the things I love more and more about Tolkien's writing, especially as I grow older. He rarely just kind of comes out and says anything. He hints, he proposes, he purposes, he lets the work speak for itself and lets the reader come to their own conclusions. We are the ones who get to decide what it means to us. Maybe it's just a good story with a lot of information about flora. Or maybe there's a bigger meaning about the interaction of fate and free will that we can spend hours talking about and postulating, which we do. It's different from a lot of the media that we currently have now. Now we just have, we have to know exactly what happens, what it means. And I really just love the subtleness of kind of everything Tolkien writes. Back to like the actual writings. No. The company reaches the opposite shore, thinking they were safe. Elbereth Gilthoniel, sighed Legolas as he looked up. Even as he did so, a dark shape like a cloud and yet not a cloud, for it moved far more swiftly, came out of the blackness in the south and sped towards the company, blotting out all light as it approached. Soon it appeared as a great winged creature, blacker than the pits in the night. Fierce voices rose up to greet it from across the water. Frodo felt a sudden chill running through him and clutching at his heart. There was a deadly cold, like the memory of an old wound in his shoulder. He crouched down as if to hide. Suddenly the great bow of Lorien sang. Shrill went the arrow from the elven string. Frodo looked up. Almost above him the winged shape swerved. There was a harsh, croaking scream as it fell out of the air, vanishing down into the gloom of the eastern shore. The sky was clean again. There was a tumult of many voices far away, cursing and wailing in the darkness, and then silence. Neither shaft nor cry came again from the east that night. Okay, now here's a spot where I literally just noticed something for the very first time, and I'll get to that in just a second though. This is clearly Nazgul flying on some creature. The reaction from Frodo alone tells us all that we really need to know. It's almost on top of Frodo until Legolas lets his arrow fly and the great creatures fell from the sky. That rhymed, didn't mean to do that. But it must be huge indeed if it felt like it was really right on top of them, but still fell on the opposite side of the river. But yes, here we have the Nazgul on the fell beast, first kind of view. Luckily, Legolas had already fitted an arrow to his bow, might have taken too long for him to do that before the creature could swoop down on them otherwise. But what was it that I noticed? This, right here. A dark shape, like a cloud and yet not a cloud, for it moved far more swiftly. Did you catch it? Okay. In The Ring Goes South, we get this from Gandalf and Aragorn. No, but I felt it, whatever it was, he answered. It may be nothing, only a wisp of thin cloud. It was moving fast then, muttered Aragorn, and not with the wind. It's almost the exact same phrasing used in those two places. One of the biggest reasons the little wisp of cloud couldn't be a Nazgul is because they weren't allowed to cross the river yet. Maybe they just weren't allowed to cross the river in force? Well, they were destroyed in the flood in Bruinen, weren't they? Well, they never found evidence of all 9 riders, I don't believe, being destroyed. At least, their housings being destroyed. So what if that cloud they saw on their journey south of Rivendell was the one Nazgul that didn't get destroyed in the flood? Does that change the whole story? No. but I do love how I can continually find things like this as I go through the book. I'm learning more and more going through it this way too. It's just awesome. It's so fun. And thank you all for watching and allowing me to discover all this new stuff and cleverness hidden in the story by Tolkien. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Memberships are open, of course. And until next time, always remember, Aude and Tulliver, they shall come again.